After a substantial wait, Rick and Morty is finally back. And to kick off Season 5, the show gave us the appropriately weirdly named Mort Dinner Rick Andre. Within, we get the fabulous stylings of Mr. Nimbus and his flopping crotch, Rick seething in his ever-present aura of annoyance, and Beth and Jerry chomping at the bit to get their kink on. But I think as fans, we can all agree that the real show stealer was Morty and his adventures with the Whovian wine. As a fantasy author and a hopelessly addicted world builder, I was practically giddy at seeing the dominoes fall in this bovine pocket dimension as it progressed from idyllic farming homestead to Moodor. It was the perfect amount of craziness that I would expect from a Rick and Morty episode, and for me, very much overshadowed the other plot lines of the season opener. Now, for those of you who have been following the channel for a while, this might sound familiar. About a year ago, I made a video on solar opposites and how its side plot took over. Many of the same narrative techniques and writing tools are used here in Mort Dinner Rick Andre, but that is actually not what I'm going to talk about today. Between my laughter and my utter gobsmackedness at Mr. Nimbus, I couldn't help but notice that the plot for Morty's adventure seemed familiar. Not bad at all, just familiar. And really even saying that out loud seems strange. How could a plotline of sentient animals learning to hate and hunt down a teenage boy by technologically advancing until they have a mastery over space and time sound familiar? Well, that's because it's the exact plotline of Season 4 Episode 5, Rattlestar Ricklactica. Morty unknowingly screws with a civilization of snakes, leading them to invent time travel in their quest to destroy him. And that is actually what the focus of this video will be. No, not Rattlestar Ricklactica. The focus will be on the show's secret storytelling weapon, Morty and Altered Time. But to fully unpack this, we have to spend a little bit of time on Rattlestar Ricklactica and why it is significant. By now, you are all aware of the two most notable names associated with Rick and Morty, Justin Roiland and Dan Harmon. Each of these famously wacky men have been outspoken about time travel, or I guess specifically, not using time travel in the show.
Because time travel is a real shark jumper.
Yes, it is.
Once you introduce into the canon of your show, it's just a dangerous toy to pull out.
Of course, just so this sentiment was crystal clear, Rick's Garage Workshop has a box labeled time travel stuff. So they literally shelved and put away time travel as a narrative convention.
Yeah.
Although your keen-eyed viewer will notice that Rick in his garage has a box that's labeled time travel.
Yeah, because that's some shit he's been trying to work on.
That's the joke, is that it's on the shelf.
Yeah.
Of course, this is kind of ironic for a fiction directly inspired by Back to the Future, a movie legendarily famous for time travel. It becomes even ironicer when you realize that time travel has been fairly consistent in the show from the very beginning. In the pilot, Rick time travels to a future dimension to procure medicine for Morty.
Not that you asked, Morty, but what just happened there is, I went into a future dimension with such advanced medicine that they had broken leg serum at every corner drugstore.
A season later, the episode A Wrinkle in Time gave us the uncertainty shenanigans, and is, as Justin Roiland says,
here's what's great about the first episode of season 2 is that it's a cautionary tale of why you don't fuck with time.
And eventually, we circle back to Rattlestar Ricklactica, which was the first episode to just flat out focus on and highly feature time travel. But this was no accident. The creators wanted to go against their word and specifically do an episode centered on overt time travel. And the reason they wanted to do it was to show just how ridiculous and dumb time travel really is.
If we're gonna make a whole snake society and go down this dumb loophole and do all this dumb stuff, the biggest dumb leap we could do is time travel.
Damn it, Slippy, come on!
Rattlestar Ricklactica was basically a giant "this is why we don't ever want to do this" episode. However, I have to think that somewhere deep inside the psyche of Justin and Dan and the other creators, They secretly do want to have storylines based around time, because while overt time travel has been kept to a minimum, some of the show's most memorable scenes and sequences have been based around time, and mainly centered on Morty. Let's revisit Season 2, Episode 2, Morty Night Run. Within, Rick and Morty travel to the addictively named arcade, Blips and Chits, and shortly after they arrive, we of the audience are blessed with this iconic sequence. Morty is unceremoniously whisked away into living the life of Roy, and then equally unceremoniously whisked out of it to return to his own reality. But it wasn't just a moment living as Roy, it was an entire lifetime condensed down into a matter of seconds. We are with Morty as he re-experiences childhood, and then as he first experiences love, the struggles of adulthood, and the healing bonds of family. And then as quick as it came, we are there when it's all ripped away from Morty, just as much a shock to us as it is to him, as he languishes and grapples with his reality burning away into another. To this day, it's one of the more memorable scenes involving Morty, but with that being said, does it sound familiar? Well, if it doesn't, let's take a quick road trip to Season 4, Episode 8, the Vat of Acid episode. Within, Morty is given a remote that more or less allows him to reset his timeline. As any teenage boy would, Morty mainly just dicks around with his newfound time powers, but then this sequence occurs. We see Morty meet a girl, fall in love, go through the ups and downs of a relationship, go through a horrific plane crash, muster the courage to fight for his own survival when all seems lost, and against all odds, come out on the other side with a smile. But of course, things can't stay that way, and Morty is ripped away from his girlfriend and his life, just as much a shock to us as it is to him, and we see him languish and grapple with his reality burning away into another. Now does it seem familiar? Yeah, it's just the Roy story from Morty Night Run. Just instead of cancer, it's a plane crash, and instead of an unfortunate skull cracking, it's an arguably more unfortunate Jerry Fatfinger. But just because the storylines share so many similarities does not make them any less powerful. Morty's adventure through time and his life is compelling, and the writers are skilled enough to distinguish the two sequences with nuances that make them feel distinct. And really, it's all kind of tragic. The Roy journey showed Morty a full life that he could never get back. But the Vat of Acid episode showed Morty a possible future. A future with the woman he loves, a future that he knows he could make a reality if he only followed the right steps. And again, at the risk of sounding repetitive, does that sound familiar? Let's get back on our bus and take another field trip to Season 4, Episode 1, The Edge of Morty. Our two titular characters are messing around with death crystals, but it's Morty who gets one embedded in his forehead. And because of this, he is given foresight into the timeline of his possible futures. And the future he settles upon is one where he gets to grow old with Jessica. All he has to do is act accordingly to how the timeline dictates. By now, you might be noticing a pattern here. Some of Morty's craziest and most memorable solo adventures come when he is interacting with altered time. They are not stories based in time travel, as Justin Roiland and Dan Harmon would be quick to remind you, but more like stories based around the concept of time itself and the craziness that can result from messing with it. As I said before, Rattlestar Galactica was made for the express reason of showcasing the ludicrous circumstances that time travel forces upon a narrative. But each of these Morty sequences, even without time travel proper, sort of do the same thing. Morty goes through trauma and completely wild scenarios because of his over-interaction with time. I mean, the Vat of Acid episode literally ends with Morty being lectured about all his bad decisions across his various timelines and the consequences thereof.
There were definitely consequences. Every time you reset to smell Jessica's hair, every time you relived a satisfying fart, that's how many Mortys you've incinerated, you greedy little junkie. Oh God!
Rattlestar Galactica shows us how one small unconsidered action can have major implications for the future. So much so that the creators and the characters eventually have to go against their time-avoidant morals just to prove a point.
So we can definitely, it's not something, time travel itself is not something you guys might be doing soon.
Because time travel is a real shark jumper.
See, Morty, you weren't saving your place and going back. I don't respect time travel. If Ant-Man and the Wasp can do it, I'm not interested.
Rick and Morty have to go to huge, although wacky and entertaining, lengths just to fix the time-based problems in these episodes. But that's actually the crux of why these time manipulation plotlines didn't stop with Rattlestar Galactica. Because that episode put the time conflict on both Rick and Morty. The pattern that we recognized before was that the truly iconic, memorable sequences surrounding time are mostly Morty solo missions. And so it seems the writers just couldn't help themselves, and therefore took the exact conflict of Rattlestar Galactica, removed Rick from it, and made that the season 5 opener. Now, through 99% of the conflict, it is only Morty dealing with these animals with a time-traversing vendetta against him caused by unintended actions. The season 5 opener was another Morty time episode, the secret weapon of the show, a storyline that consistently wows us viewers. But this secret weapon also has a silver bullet, one that we haven't discussed yet. Love. Okay, well actually it's love interest. Across the sequences, scenes, and episodes where Morty deals with time-based conflicts, he is anchored by and focused on love. In Morty Night Run, his high school sweetheart turned wife is right by him through his battle with cancer, and she is the first person he calls for when he returns.
You kind of wasted your 30s, though, with that whole bird-watching phase.
Where's my wife?
Morty!
In the Vat of Acid episode, that iconic middle sequence is completely focused on Morty's girlfriend and his pain of losing her. In Edge of Morty, Morty is singularly focused on achieving his possible future with Jessica. And in Mort Dinner Rick Andre, Morty goes through all the trouble with the Whovians because he wants to romance Jessica and eventually protect her. Of course, every single one of these storylines, whether big or small, ends with Morty losing his love interest, but I think that is all part of the tragedy that makes them so compelling. See, the reason it is so important from a narrative level for Morty to have these solo adventures is because Rick and Morty as characters represent two different storytelling aspects. I said this long ago, but it still applies now. Morty is the mundane boy who accompanies Rick the God-Man. A huge part of Rick's allure for the audience is that, number one, he is virtually unknowable, and number two, he is virtually all-powerful. Not only do we know so little about Rick, many of the episodes are just him bending reality to his will. Half of the fun of Rick and Morty isn't being worried about if they will survive, it's being on the edge of your seat wondering what crazy thing Rick will do to assert his dominance over the situation. The man has an answer for everything. And that is exactly why, for these sequences of Morty dealing with time-based issues to reach their full potential, Rick cannot be around. Unlike his godly grandfather, Morty is just a mundane human being, a regular teenage boy. He is the one we are supposed to identify with and know deeply because we have all been powerless teenagers living mundane lives. On these solo sequences, Morty's goal isn't to obtain power crystals or bang a hive mind or reconcile with a knocked up planet. Morty's goal is probably the simplest thing ever: to love and to live. All Morty wants over all these scenes is to spend his days with someone else, and ultimately that is knowable, that is understandable, and that is compelling. That kind of storyline speaks to us on our deepest level, even if the conflict surrounding it is ludicrous. And that actually leads to the other most important reason for Rick to not be around. When Rick is absent, the conflict and setting are free to explode. Again, Morty is just a guy who is completely unprepared to handle any of these situations. His careless actions and palpable frustrations are probably exactly what some of us would do if things got so out of control. Some of the craziest, most fun things to happen on the show occur when Rick isn't present, because as long as he is present, the universe bends to his will and control. The juxtaposition between Morty's powerlessness and Rick's wide control is made evident in Morty Night Run. Even while living the full life of Roy in a simulated reality, Rick still had the control to keep a portion of his conscious mind in his original reality.
No, you did a bad thing selling that gun, but you could undo it if you wanted.
Yeah, that's the difference between you and me, Morty. I never go back to the carpet store.
Holy shit! This guy's taking Roy off the grid!
If Rick had been interacting with the Whovians, they wouldn't have gotten past the pre-industrial era. But with just Morty, the conflict snowballed into magnificent chaos that surprised us in Morty at every turn. With Morty centered at the conflict instead of Rick, there becomes a real chance for things to go horribly wrong. Where when Rick is centered in the conflict, we know things will ultimately, maybe tragically so, go right. And to be clear, I'm not saying nothing ever goes wrong when Rick participates. That is far from the truth. But what I am saying is that the show truly excels when allowing Morty to struggle and learn on his own, when diving into those very human wants that Morty has, when allowing that uncertainty of whether Morty will succeed or end in tragedy to flourish, even if he needs saving from the consequences thereof. Rick and Morty is a show with a ton of aspects and moving pieces that contribute to making it so entertaining. And even though the creators have resolved to keep time travel off that list of aspects and pieces, their sequences involving Morty, his interactions with altered time, and his hope for simple love are some of the best that the show has to offer, and I sincerely hope they continue. Anyway, thank you all for watching all the way until the end. If you like what you heard, like, comment, and subscribe. If you really want to be a homie, support through Patreon or check out some of my books. Links will be in the description. As always, it was a pleasure, and I will talk to you all again soon.